Welcome to Uniquely Qualified. I'm your friend and host, Liz Ficken, and I'm so glad you're here. Uniquely Qualified is a podcast that empowers guests to share their experience, strength, and hope in overcoming challenges in the spirit of mutual healing. We hope that you'll leave feeling more aware, connected, and supported in navigating the human experience. This episode discusses death and the American political system. Please take care of yourself and engage as feels supportive. Today's guest has been a friend of mine since 2012 when we met serving as Teach for America Alabama Corps members. We both taught high school social studies and found common ground in our love of history, civil rights, and philosophic conversations. Welcome to the podcast, Representative Ensler.
Thank you, and good to be on. And that makes us sound so serious with all of our shared interests, but that was my favorite part of TFA, was connecting with like-minded people.
Yes, same, absolutely. And so for our listeners, here is a more filled out summary of who Representative Phil Ensler is and what he has accomplished. Phil lives in Montgomery, Alabama, and is a member of the Alabama House of Representatives, representing District 74. Born and raised in New York City, Phil developed a passion for civil rights history that generated his lifetime commitment to serving others. Representative Ensler attended George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where he served in President Obama's administration. In 2012, as mentioned, Phil joined Teach for America, serving in the Alabama Corps, working as a social studies teacher at Lee High School in Montgomery. He also started a program called Marching On, an organization that provides students the opportunity to fly to DC to meet with leaders, tour colleges, and learn about career opportunities. Phil has continued this program, now recruiting students from all 5 of Montgomery's traditional public high schools to participate. Following Teach for America, Phil returned home to New York City, where he earned a law degree from Yeshiva University Cardozo School of Law. Ensler was then called back to Alabama, where he continued his career experience, working as the executive director of the Jewish Federation of Central Alabama, the senior policy advisor with the office of Montgomery Mayor Stephen Reed, and policy counsel with Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. When Phil isn't working hard for his constituents, he enjoys reading, cheering on the Yankees, and serving as executive director of the Jewish Federation of Central Alabama. Whew.
There you go.
That's a big bio, Phil.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you fitting it all in. And on the Yankees, for anyone that follows baseball, it was tough with them losing the World Series, but there's always next year.
Yes, always next year. I wasn't sure if it was a little too soon. We're recording this in the middle of November, and so I'm glad that we can say good luck next year.
Thank you. Yeah, it took me a couple of weeks of getting over it, but I've accepted the results.
Yeah, there we go. So, Phil, in your own words, how are you uniquely qualified?
I'm uniquely qualified to speak about being a public official, especially in Alabama, and also uniquely qualified to speak about Jewish traditions around death, as it relates especially to my dad.
Thank you. I'm just really eager for people to hear your wonderful story and all the ways that you're uniquely qualified.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing.
So let's go back to the origin story, which is you growing up in New York City, and you are a twin, correct? You have a twin sister?
Yep. So I have a twin sister, 5 minutes older than I am. So she very much has embraced being an older sister in that sense.
Good for her.
We were born New Year's Day. So, always get to celebrate New Year's and our birthdays at the same time, which is a lot of fun. And, we grew up very close and we remain very close and, have a special twin bond.
I love that. You are the first twin on the podcast. And I think that it's just a really unique experience when people are raised in a family where there's multiples. It's just, I think there's like a unique and shared experience there that's just kind of fun to talk about.
Absolutely.
So tell us more about your family. It's you and your twin sister and your parents?
Yeah, so my mom and dad divorced when my sister and I were young. We were about 5 when they separated, but they lived close by to one another in Manhattan. And we spent time with both of them, and had a very kind of typical New York City childhood experience of going to Central Park and playing Little League there, or going to our local neighborhood park for fun. We went to for the most part, went to public school from when we were pretty young and through high school. And first went to a neighborhood school that we walked to, but then started taking the subway when we were 12 years old. And there we were riding the subway with Wall Street bankers and construction workers, and everyone on their way to their jobs. And it really exposed us to just so many different cultures and backgrounds. And
Hmm.
on the subway you would see ads in all different languages. So that was our experience. And a big part of it was also being Jewish. Growing up, leading up to our bar and bat mitzvah, we went to Hebrew school. Of course, at that young age, we complained about going and tried to find every excuse, why to not go certain days.
Hmm.
But did that, and then we went to also a Jewish summer camp um, in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and that was really formative in shaping my Jewish identity, learning Jewish values. And I really tie a lot of who I am today back to that camp experience. That was I at first around my bar mitzvah age wasn't that into Judaism and the faith, but as I got a
Hmm.
little bit older into high school, just really connected with it on a spiritual level. It gave life a certain sense of purpose and meaning. There was actually a point when I was 15, the summer between ninth and 10th grade, where I came back from camp, and like people at school like noticed a difference in my demeanor and were like, "Who's this new Phil?" So we even joked that like there was old Phil, before I was 15, and then new Phil. And yeah, it was a great experience. I went to Yankee games, and just really fortunate to have had some great experiences.
Oh, that sounds like such a great and rich childhood. I'm wondering, and forgive me in advance if I'm not going to use the right language here, but where in the spectrum of Judaism would you say that your family, your community, that camp that you went to, where does that fall? How do you describe that?
Yeah, so for listeners who don't know, there are generally three denominations of Judaism. So Reform is the least religious, Conservative is the middle ground, or kind of moderately religious, and then Orthodox is the most religious. And then within that, there are different sects of Orthodox
Hmm.
Judaism, and there are even amongst conservative and Reform Jews some differences even within those denominations. All that to say, we were so when you have a bar and bat mitzvah together for a boy and girl, it's called a b'nai mitzvah. So
Oh,
we
didn't know that.
had a b'nai mitzvah at a Reform congregation. Our summer camp was also Reform. But in high school, I started going actually to a conservative congregation that had a strong social justice mission and message. Some of my best friends in high school, their families went to that congregation. And I just, like any religious experience, if you connect to a certain rabbi or pastor, or or inspired by their sermons. And it was a very, the conservative congregation I went to, it's called Brotherhood Synagogue. And it, not to be corny, but it really does have that kind of brotherhood, sisterhood type feel.
Hmm.
One of the things that they do during the winter is open up as a shelter for homeless people.
Hmm.
And I served, would go there on the nights that it was open and just serve meals and spend time with some of the individuals there. And, that also was very eye opening. But also it showed me like that the Jewish faith, like the best parts of it are this service
Mm.
and doing good for others.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and that makes sense for the line of work that you're in now.
Yeah, and I'll add it. I'm also very comfortable in Orthodox settings, and like there are times I can go to an Orthodox service, and it's there's a certain you know at an Orthodox service almost everything is in Hebrew,
Mhm.
but that gives it almost an additional element of passion that always resonates as well. So the long way of saying that I've kind of been exposed to all three denominations. Um, but yeah, now if you going back to my b'nai mitzvah, even high school, I never thought like I'd end up in a professional role in the Jewish community.
Mhm.
But here in Montgomery, the Jewish community is pretty small, certainly
Mhm.
compared to New York. Um, and found myself getting more involved, very quickly. And they were looking for, younger, new, leadership. So I've in certain ways kind of walked into the role, and it's been really great so far.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I have you watched You Don't Want This?
Yeah, it was that one with Adam Brody and
Yeah,
Kristen Bell.
I was say, are you the Adam Brody of Jewish Montgomery?
That's funny. I have watched it, and I guess the difference between me and Adam Brody are that amongst many things, but with that he's a rabbi, so there's
Yes,
kind of that
yes, fair.
added element. And I know a lot of people have had crushes on Adam Brody all since his OC days.
Yeah.
So I can't compete with that.
Um, well, thank you. I was just curious. Um, and we can cut that later if you don't want that one to stay in, Phil. Um,
No, no, totally.
okay.
It's look, there's such serious topics. It's good to inject a little humor.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for saying that. And for our listeners, they at this point they're familiar with I'm pretty comfortable coming in and out of humor and talking about tough things, especially with friends. So I just want to make sure that everybody is feeling comfortable when I'm inserting a pop culture joke about your experience as a Jewish person in Montgomery. So thank you for being along for the ride.
Sure, absolutely.
Did you do Birthright?
I did. So my mom brought my sister and I to Israel twice, once before our B'nai Mitzvah, once after. But then I was still eligible to do Birthright in college. I did it my senior
Mm,
year. And if you're eligible to do it if you haven't been on an organized trip before. So because it was just with family, and it was great. I mean, going at a slightly older age, where I again was more interested in Judaism and just it was the right before my final semester of undergrad, so I maturity wise was more mature. So yes, I did do it, and it was a great experience.
I've that's what I've heard across the board from people who have gone on Birthright is that it's a great experience. They leave feeling just more connected with the sense of their themselves, their community. So it's great that you were able to do that, take multiple trips over there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. No, it's and I was supposed to go on October 12th, of last year. And
Mm.
then, of course, the attack that was October 7th.
Oh my gosh.
So that changed my plans. And, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I know it's a very, difficult topic, and a lot of understandably strong views and emotions. But yeah, I was supposed to go for a fourth time, but that's been on hold for
Mm.
now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that events turned out so that you are safe. And maybe we can circle back to that topic when we get a little bit more into your career and grown up adult Phil and things that he stands for and is thinking about. But for now, maybe we could just continue talking a little bit more about growing up. So we have your twin, your mom and your dad, you're growing up in New York City, having a very rich experience where you're exposed to a lot of diversity, different ways of thinking, activism. And at some point, you make a decision that you are going to go to George Washington University. Can you talk us through your decision to go to DC, how you decided what you wanted to study? Just take us through that part of your journey.
Yeah, so there at my high school, I had that one high school history teacher who was just, my lifetime, or lifelong now favorite. And he taught a lot and focused a lot on civil rights. We learned about in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney were murdered by the Klan for registering voters.
Mhm.
The Schwerner and Goodman were both Jews from New York, young guys in their 20s.
Mhm.
So as a high school student, even that story resonated a lot
Mhm.
and instilled in me that interest in social justice and in civil rights. Um, at my high school, we also were required to do internships. So once a week, instead of going to school, we had to go do an internship. So I interned on a race for governor in New York, and he won. And then I continued interning in the governor's office for the rest of high school. So that really shaped that. I then saw public service in government as a way to kind of fight that good fight of trying to improve people's lives, trying to make things a little bit better, and just the intersection then of learning about civil rights, feeling connected to that history, and then also this internship. And that's why I'm a huge proponent of internships, because it's a
Mhm.
great way to just see what you like. But all of that to say that that was also my senior year of high school was when Obama was running for the first time. So there was then all this excitement between Hillary and Obama and just that campaign. So it to me, DC was just the natural. If you're interested in politics and government, that's the center of it, obviously, to say the obvious. So yeah, went to GW with the intention of doing internships and being more involved, and studying political science, and then to kind of come full circle, I interned one semester at an organization called um, uh, it's a long name, but the short version of it is Civil Rights Under Law.
Okay.
Um, and and then I interned after that in the Obama administration. And again, just which and what has been then a pattern in my life of doing kind of more of the advocacy type work from a nonprofit side, then going in and doing it from the government side. And I've had that pattern, it seems, ever since.
Mhm. And tell us a little bit about did your dad want you to go to DC? Was he a proponent of spread your wings and fly, or would if he had rather to keep you closer to home?
Yeah, he was. No, he loved me going to DC. He brought me down to do college tours. So I have
Hmm.
a vivid memory of it. It was pouring rain during the time of our college tour. So we were in ponchos and just like running from building to building throughout the tour. But I'll always remember that. And then he was very involved at GW throughout the time I was there. He was like a
Mm.
parent kind of representative. I always joke like he seriously though had more fun than I did, and he would just come and he loved just entertaining. He did it for new student orientation, so every year there was a new class coming in. So he had a lot of fun with that. So no, he was a very big proponent of me in DC. Uh, we can then, once we get into me moving to Alabama, that's where he was not a big fan.
Oh, a little
Um,
okay, okay. Hmm. Understand. Let's definitely touch on that when we get to the beginning of the Bama years.
sure,
And while we're talking about your dad, do you mind what was his name? Because I know we're going to be referencing him a lot.
Stefan. So and people
Stefan.
refer, it's spelled in a way that's commonly pronounced Stefan,
Oh,
S
okay.
T E F A N. But I guess the New Yorker in him, it was Stefan, not
Stefan.
Stefan. Yeah.
I love that. And I love how he was just so clearly a cheerleader for you and supportive of at least of you heading off to DC to learn and grow.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's you know, a great memory, and one of the other really great memories during that time was uh I mean, he was in DC frequently, like I said, for these orientations.
Hmm.
But one time I was able to bring him when I was interning at the White House, bring him into the West Wing, and actually bring him. Obama was out of town that day, so I was able to bring my dad into the Oval Office, and we had this moment,
Oh my
you know,
gosh.
just being in there, and that was, I mean, just like you can't ask for anything better and more special. And my mom came down, and I guess the the tours were always interesting. The first time I was supposed to bring her on a tour of the White House, it got canceled at the last, or they at the last minute said visitors weren't allowed. It turned out
Oh,
that was the day Bin Laden was killed. And
oh,
because the president and his team were in the Situation Room, they just didn't want the traffic of any visitors. So
yeah.
eventually, my mom got to do the tour. But yeah, that was one of the coolest parts, was having, and my sister did it, my best friends. Like, there was just this period of time where like I was just like bringing everyone in my life into the White House, and like just will always have those incredible memories.
That is that is so cool. I'm like my face hurts from smiling so big. I just can't imagine how special that would have been for you, for your friends and family, but especially for your dad to for you to have that memory now of having time in the White House with him in that way. That's just I can't think of many other people who could say that.
Yeah, no, I know it's very unique in a lot of
Hmm.
ways.
Okay, so I have a couple questions about you living in DC. One is around your role in the Obama administration. And before it leaves my mind, I also want to ask if you attended a synagogue or were involved in any sort of like Hillel on campus. So I'm going to hit you with two of those and choose your adventure, answer
Sure.
however you want.
No, yeah, exactly. So I went to Hillel on, there was one on GW's campus, and was very involved. Those Friday nights I would go to services there, and that was just such a great sense of community. And after a week of classes and exams and internships, like just to have that space to go to was really meaningful. And there were a couple times where I went to, there were other congregations off campus, that I visited at times, but really Hillel was the main one in the Obama administration. So, and I'll share this full part of it. So for listeners who maybe can, you know, be inspired, or find some, inspiration in it, that I applied the first time for the internship my freshman year, did not get it. And then when did other internships and gained more experience. The second time I applied, I got waitlisted,
Mm.
meaning that if someone couldn't do it, then they would accept me. So I was then accepted like a week into the program. So all the other interns had started. I was assigned to the Office of Presidential Correspondence, which is a glorified name for the mailroom. It is in a separate building 3 blocks away from the White House, and for security purposes. And it's where all the letters that people write to the president and first lady come in. And so I was assigned there, and I share all of this step by step to, that in my mind I had this image of like, I'm going to be going to the White House every day, and how
Hmm.
cool is that going to be? And just each step of the way to kind of get what seemed like the short end of the stick. But while in that correspondence office, I approached it with a really good attitude and outlook. And um, people from the administration would speak to our intern class. And there was a gentleman, Michael Blake, who was the director of African American outreach, also a native New Yorker. And one day after he spoke to us, I in my mind had like, all right, I know I'm in the correspondence office, but I'd love to do some work uh, with the African American Outreach Office. That related to my work in New York City with the governor's office and some of what I did, certainly the civil rights part. So I gave him like we were in an elevator. So I was like, it's literally my elevator pitch. And I just said, I was like, hey, I would love to ever help you out with projects. Um, so I started helping him out and then was able to do a little bit in the correspondence office and then a little bit with him in African American outreach. And then when I thought when the internship was supposed to end, they asked me to stay on beyond that to then intern for the president's personal assistant. So this guy, Reggie Love, well known he was a Duke basketball player under
Mm-hmm.
Coach K, and then was like Obama's kind of right hand man in helping keep him on schedule and give him his briefing books, and traveled everywhere with him. And the feedback I got was that because I had done a good job, and I say that very humbly, but did a good job in the other roles, they extended that opportunity to stay on. And interning for Reggie, I mean, his office was right outside the Oval Office. So there were, the first time when I started in Reggie's office, Reggie starting to give me tasks. President Obama just pops into the doorway. And, there were a couple of moments like that. And there were times that, I saw foreign heads of state and, cabinet members and members of Congress. And I was just like a fly on the wall, and was, and I was still in college and a political science student. And my attitude was like, I'm learning some stuff in class, but like, just like, what's better than this experience? And, I share that with listeners, and I share that often with young people when I talk to them, that you don't always get what you want the first
Mm-hmm.
time. There's disappointment, there's rejection. It hurts, it sucks. Like, there's no sugarcoating it. And it's a disappointment and a bummer if you don't get something. But I continued to follow through on it because it was something that I really wanted to do. And each step of the way, it wasn't exactly what I wanted initially, but in the end, I've had this amazing experience. And with both Michael Blake and Reggie Love, to this day, they're mentors. We talk frequently. We catch up. We can tie into this when we get to that part, but they've met with students from Montgomery when I've brought them on trips. So just, having those, that support system, having people who gave me a chance, has inspired a lot of now what I do.
Yeah, I think that is really inspirational, and I do feel like there's a lot of great lessons that people can take in, like you're saying, doing a good job where you are can lead to things that you might not even be able to dream of. Like having a front row seat to the comings and goings of the Oval Office. I mean, I'm sure that's somebody's dream when they're applying for a White House internship, but then for you to not get it immediately, but then eventually have that view into the administration, that's just it's a really good reminder, I think, for a lot of us.
Yeah, and let me, add in one more part about it, that
Yeah.
specifically with Michael Blake and especially with Reggie, because Reggie was often the person greeting, whoever was then coming into the Oval Office. They treated everyone from the janitor to a CEO to a foreign head of state to other interns. Everyone was treated with the same level of respect. Um, Reggie all the time would ask me about what movies had I seen, how's my sister, how's my cousin, and just to see that people in the highest places of power and in the White House were genuinely good, kind, caring people. And I'll be very blunt that especially in the times that we're in right now,
Mm-hmm.
it is such a contrast to think about, just when you're in politics and when you're in government, that there's still a lot to be said about being a good person, whatever
Mm-hmm.
policies you're pursuing, but just treating people, and to, as a 22-year-old, to see that in guys that had gotten into pretty high positions and were around power, to just see their genuine, kindness, was also really educational and inspiring. And just I'm grateful for it.
I really appreciate you highlighting that because I do feel like what is modeled right now in our current environment is you can step over people and buy your way into positions of power. You can cut people down and you can win. But there is still very much another way, which is being respectful and kind and human. And that's one thing that I hope that people take from any episode of Uniquely Qualified that they listen to is you never know what somebody is going through. Be kind, period. And so I love that you got to see that alive and well at the highest level of power in the United States at that time. The people were being respectful and kind. And I'm imagining it involves like looking people in the eye and shaking hands with intention and not just checking the box, but like really being a good, kind member of the community.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And trying to just be a positive presence in people's lives. And like you said, you don't know what people are going through. And,
Yeah.
work is stressful, life is stressful, but just that little bit of support from people, even if it's not, explicit
Yeah.
support, even if it's just how they, recognize you and embrace you. Yeah, that goes a long way.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm so glad that you had that experience and exposure.
It also spoiled me though, because then the bar was set so high. So everywhere else I've been in politics, I'm, you know, expect the same. And, you know, they're, they set the bar very high.
Yeah. But what I feel like I see in you, and I guess I've only known you post these years, but that's who you are though. You are kind, you are considerate, you listen to people when they speak, and I'm sure you were raised by your parents to be that way, but it sounds like you had some gentlemen in public service that modeled that that was possible for you too. Is that an accurate read?
Absolutely, yeah. No,
Yeah.
and it, and I'll add in my high school history teacher was
Oh
a big
yeah.
part of that,
Hmm.
as well. And yeah, really had a great support system. And I appreciate you saying those things about me. I certainly try and, fall short at times, but we're all just trying to be a little better.
Yeah, that's all we can really do at the end of the day is just try. And I think that just even striving for that, like on days like we're recording this on November 14th, and so a lot of us right now are still kind of in the more acute grief with how the election turned out in some ways. So all we can do is try. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other, getting through and having hope for the future.
Exactly. And I know since the election, people have different approaches to how to
Right.
respond and process all of it. And there are people who are like fired up and they're like, we need to organize and we need to,
Right.
fight these legal battles. There are other people, and I had shared this on Facebook, that I was like, also be kind to yourself. And like, if you need time to just process, if you need to, need time with family, if you need, and it's great that we have the spectrum. There's, so sometimes telling people, oh, just, get up and dig in, and not everyone needs to hear that. Similarly, though, there are people who don't need to hear, that, sit with your emotions, just want to,
Yeah.
be in action mode. And I think allowing for people to deal with it in ways that are best for them, is really just something that we should all be mindful of. And just have seen other people handling things in different ways. And this is beyond just the presidential election.
Yeah.
But I think for anything in life, like there's always that looking at other people and comparing ourselves of like, oh, they're working harder, so I should work harder. Oh, they, are doing X, Y, and Z. And it's just, I know it's easier said than done, but as much as we can just, you know, be kind to ourselves, and approach things and what's right for us.
Hmm. That really is in alignment with how I feel and what I believe and what it's reminding me of. So listeners of the podcast at this point are aware that I have been in therapy for years. I'm a big believer in take your seat, do whatever the work is that you need to do. But I just think it's a really great tool and resource for a lot of us. And after the 2016 election, I remember my therapist giving me the advice of this is a time where you can be gentle with yourself. It was really challenging for me. Um, Candidly speaking, when Kavanaugh was appointed to the Supreme Court, I had an actual panic attack in my like very white collar, very male dominant finance firm that I was working for. It was just like so I was so somatically anxious about how that happened. So she was reminding me there's a time to fight a fight. And for you, like your body is telling you that that is not now. Like you need to take care of you, and there will be a time for you to step in. And I think about that, and I feel like that mirrors what you're saying, where it's like you don't know what people are going through. People should take care of themselves in whatever the best way possible, and there are different ways for us to engage depending on the season of our life or what resources we have available, but there's a place for all of us in this.
There's, yeah, and on that note, I would say I know it's human instinct often to like try to find solutions, or we want to
Yeah.
offer people, and say, well, why don't you do this? It'll make you feel better. Why don't you do that? To get out of your funk. And I think a more helpful, and what I've also through therapy have come to embrace is like not always trying to offer solutions or like suggestions to people, but instead, just recognizing and acknowledging how they feel and saying, what can I do to help you, or how can I best support you?
Yeah.
And putting it, and I'm, I'm not always great about that. There are those times where you just want to tell people like, hey, I really
Yeah.
think you should do it
Yeah.
this way. But I know that's how I prefer to be approached, and
Mm-hmm.
try to then do that for others, of not being too opinionated one way or the other. All that to
Yeah.
say that it's sometimes we need a little nudge and we need a push from the people who love us.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. I I appreciate you saying that because I do think that one of the things that I really appreciate in my friendships is when people first start with, what do you need right now? Is this a time where you need a pep talk, or is this a time where you just need me
Yeah,
to listen? And I really appreciate that, where I feel like a younger version of myself and some of my friends would be like, just people telling you what you think and telling you what to
yeah.
do, versus I feel like as we mature in age, we can pause and say, like, what do you need? I know what I'm thinking, but like, what do you need right now to get through whatever it is you're going through?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I would say the same of my friend group, and specifically TFA friends
Mm-hmm.
from Alabama. A lot are really good at that, and I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, me too. Me too. This is great stuff, Phil.
Yeah, no, I feel like we've covered a lot, but I know we have a ways to go.
Yeah, yeah, we're still in President Obama is in office. Um, so let's make the segue from there into your decision to apply to Teach for America. Can you talk us
Yeah,
through
so
that?
I love being in DC, but Teach for America was recruiting on GW's campus, and the with a social justice type message, um, and what was appealing about it was that I had, as amazing as the White House was, I was wearing a suit and tie every day. I was very removed from people who are impacted by policies and laws, and just felt that I wanted to do something a little more hands-on, a little bit more direct as far as the service. And Teach for America obviously had that appeal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also at the time, having the mentors that I did, to ask the potential through TFA to be a mentor, and be an adult figure for students, it just all kind of clicked for me. And then
Mm-hmm.
the civil rights component of it, or my passion for civil rights, let me backtrack a second. So my between my sophomore and junior year of college, I came to Alabama by myself to view and tour some of the civil rights sites, and came to Montgomery and went to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Dr.
Mhm.
King was pastor, and the Rosa Parks Museum, and um, all of that. I had that interest since
Mhm.
my high school history teacher and throughout college, and it was the most like spiritual experience I ever had. I felt like this deep connection.
Mhm.
I felt like centered and just like felt really at peace in a lot of ways. Um, and so when I was then thinking of Teach for America, the idea of being in Alabama and teaching history really just to me was really appealing.
Mhm.
So I applied and got placed in Alabama, and that's where my dad and I clashed more than we ever have. He thought that like my trajectory was that I would then go right to law school, or I'd stay
Mhm.
involved in politics, that I'd be in DC and New York, and I had all these contacts and relationships. So like the fact that I was like, nope, I want to go to Alabama to be a teacher, just really threw him off. And I think the deeper part of it was that he wanted me close, and you know with GW he can get in the car and drive 4 hours from New York to DC. I think the idea of Alabama to him, and he going back to Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. My dad was 15 when that happened. So to him, like the idea of a Jewish guy being in the Deep South, um, doing some sort of social justice type work, I think it also scared him.
Yeah.
But instead of expressing that in a uh, you know thoughtful and caring way, it came out in a very he was I basically said like if I do it, he would disown me,
Oh
and
no.
it was I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was not a great period there for a couple of months, but I just had this immense conviction, and I knew it felt like the right thing to do. I knew I wasn't like making some sort of rash, irresponsible decision. Um, so I accepted, and I said, Dad, I was like, I'm doing this. Either way, I'm doing this, but it will be that much better if I have your love and support, as you've always been there for me. And he then came around and helped me move in and helped set up my apartment, and was very proud of that. So not to say it was water under the bridge, it was certainly a contentious
Mhm.
period. But for me, it was also liberating, um, to follow my path and to follow what was best for me in a way that it was true to who I was, and that I didn't like cave to my parents. And look, I say to young people all the time, I'm like, there are certain things like your parents have your best interest at heart, like you should listen to them.
Mhm.
But it's at that age of 22, I just felt that I needed to do what was best for me, and not just go along with what my dad or family wanted
Mhm.
to. It was a tough decision, but it was look, I mean, fast forward, it's like here I am 12
Mhm.
years later, and obviously we'll get into the years between then and now. But yeah,
Mhm.
it was an exciting time once I got here, and it's changed my life for the better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really interesting about your dad's hesitation. I maybe we could just talk a little bit about both of us have a shared experience in terms of I am a West Coast girl. I grew up in Montana. Oh, hit my microphone. Grew up in Montana, moved to Portland, went to school in Southern California, and then moved to Alabama. I'd never been that far east. I had never been that far south. And there was a lot of perception. I would say there's still a lot of perception about what Alabama is and what Alabama isn't. And if I maybe put myself in your dad's shoes with all the like the love and best intentions, there's how we saw people like the freedom riders get treated during the civil rights movement, other connotation of people coming from the outside in and being physically harmed, murdered. But also, listeners, I'll fact check myself on this to make sure this is accurate, but I believe that it was 1992 when the FBI officially um, was able to finally financially disable the Klan based on a lynching that happened in Mobile, and
Yeah.
that's in our lifetimes. And so when I think about what it would be like to have a child that has any minority identifier, sending them there when it doesn't feel that long ago, I could see how that would be scary. But now sitting here and like you're talking to me in Montgomery, like some of the best people I've ever met, some of the best food I've ever eaten, some of the best times of my life was in Alabama. And I just feel like since living there, I have this desire to want to like check people when there's like assumptions about what the South is
Yeah.
or isn't. Am I making sense what I'm saying here?
Absolutely no.
Okay,
And
okay.
I've become, such a proponent and champion and advocate for the state, and
Yeah.
because of my experience and the community here. And there's as much as at times like people from the east and west coast, there's they think that people in the South are closed-minded,
Hmm.
or not well-traveled.
Hmm.
But it goes both ways, in that there are
That's
a
right.
lot of those people, who haven't been here. They have their perception, or like you said, their assumptions, and
Hmm.
the reality is that things are more nuanced. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't a lot of challenges and injustices and inequities here, but there's also a lot of really good stuff.
I'm if you'll indulge me, I'll tell a story I like to tell to
Sure,
illustrate.
sure.
Like, okay, so living in SEC country, I never, other than watching University of Montana football growing up, I never really cared about college football. You move to
Yeah,
Alabama, you got to like you have to, where you don't have to, but you'll maybe have a little better time if you pay attention. And so I had the
yeah,
opportunity while I lived in Alabama to attend and tailgate both a University of Alabama football game and an Auburn football game. Both different experiences, but both so fun. Didn't leave hungry or thirsty. Just walking around with friends, like, honey, have you eaten? Here's a sandwich, or come have a drink over
right.
here. Just so warm. And I'm saying this as an alumna of the University of Oregon, where I got my executive MBA, go and tailgate in this part of the country, and I'm like, is no one gonna offer me like a chance to play cornhole at your little tent?
Right.
Do I have to bring my own sandwich? What's going on here? And it was just, I bring that up to people to be like, this is what it's like, just the community and the warmth and the like, just taking care of one another, which in this part of the world, I haven't seen that exemplified in the same way. So just I like to tell that story. So thanks for letting me take the airtime to share.
Sure. No, that it's funny. I saw someone who must I guess maybe an alumni of the University of Oregon, and posted like a video that he went to an Alabama game, and he was like, not gonna lie, like they do things pretty well here. He's like, go Ducks, but they do things pretty well here.
Yeah.
So that certainly makes sense. So
Yeah.
my first kind of introduction to Alabama football, especially, was my first year then of TFA, and I know
Hmm.
we'll get more into that. Um, but the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, is always in like September, usually September, and then Yom Kippur um, is 10 days after that, and the two biggest holidays of the year. And one of them fell on a Saturday, and I was you're supposed to be very focused, and it's a very
Hmm.
serious, solemn holiday. And I just remember people leaving early because they services early because they wanted to go catch the game, or they were checking
Hmm.
their cell phones for the score. And I was like, wow, people really love their college football here. But it turned me on to it, and same thing ever since. I've have always been an Alabama fan, and My mom and sister are fans and like watch the games, and we are always texting. And I'm like, we fully embrace
Mm-hmm.
that culture. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fun. It's a
yeah,
fun piece of living in that part of the world, I think.
absolutely.
So you have that tension with your dad about him not necessarily wanting you to move to Alabama and do Teach for America. You have that moment where you decide to do it anyway and he supports you. Let's get into those TFA years. Now that we've talked about football, we can we can maybe move into some of the other TFA stuff.
Sure. Yeah. And I was placed at, like you said, Lee High School in Montgomery. And that first year, and so many people who either who've done TFA, who have friends who did it, who know something about it, like that first year teaching is just a whirlwind of trying to figure out, writing lesson plans and grading assignments and
Mm-hmm.
managing your classroom and like all of the things, and just exhausted by the end of the day, exhausted by the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
um but I felt that I was every day like waking up and doing something meaningful, and something where in our own small ways can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is a lot of things are interwoven or in my life. So like at the end of college, at the end of the White House, um they do what's called like a exit photo, where you get to, with the president, take a photo in the Oval Office. To President Obama then, and so I did that with President Obama, but he knew I was moving to Alabama for TFA. And typical Obama fashion, like we had this deep conversation about Dr. King and the Promised Land. And you know President Obama said, no matter how, he's like, teaching will be hard, but like no matter what, like just remember, like you're making a difference. And so like literally every
Oh
day I'm
my
like, well, President
gosh.
Obama like told me to, I was like, what better inspiration? um you know I share that with like still like a just sense of like, I can't believe I actually got to have that experience in that moment. But yeah, during those really hard days, like, there was, Obama's voice of like,
Yeah.
you can do it and keep at it. And just having a
Mm-hmm.
great, support system of other core members and friends
Mm-hmm.
who, you know, it just was this people who we had the same values. We had, um, just this, really just genuinely good people. And, also, made sure that we had a good time at times. I know, especially that
Mm-hmm.
first year, it didn't always happen. Um, but, just have a lot of great memories from that. And my first year teaching, um, started the trip to Washington, D.C. for students of mine. And it was because I just been there and had these relationships. The hard part was like the logistics of figuring out like how to bring a group of, you know, 15 kids and chaperones, and like, how do you book flights for that many people? How do you,
Mm-hmm.
secure hotel rooms for all of that? So that took a lot of planning, but started it that year. And that was, we went in December of 2012. And now literally have done the trip every year, except 2020, of course, because of the pandemic. The crazy thing is that the students who went on the trip the first year are now older than I was when I brought them on the trip. And
Oh
I was
my
like, oh my gosh, I was
gosh.
like, we're getting old.
We
Um,
were also babies. We were also like, human brain finishes developing at 25. They were sending us in there as 22-year-olds. We were young. We might be
we
old now, but we
were,
were also very young back then.
that is very true. But yeah, it was a great, a hard but rewarding first year. And also a huge shout out to the teachers at the non-TFA teachers at my school, what we would call veteran educators who had
Mm-hmm.
been working in the school system for a while. They a lot really took me under their wing. There was that mentorship, and certainly following a pattern in my life where I had there was one particular or individual at Lee who was a biology teacher, um, and right across the hall from me, and learned a lot from him. And again,
Mhm.
just having really fortunate to have this pattern in my life of mentors and people who took me under their wing. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that was the first year.
Yeah. Yeah, very much relating, because so for listeners, Phil was in Montgomery. I was about 45 minutes south in Butler County. I was at Greenville High School, and I had similar experience in terms of I just can't thank the veteran educators enough. Any of you listen to this, just know I will never forget your kindness and helping me with things like this West Coast girl did not understand why it was important for my students to say yes ma'am, no ma'am, thank you ma'am, until I started getting run over, as they say. And man, they really helped me out and gave me a home away from home. So I'm relating to that and just wanting to make sure I out loud say thank you to those members of the community.
Yeah, no, it really to have that support from people, and again, I know it's been a theme now of what we've mentioned, but having people who are there for you, whatever the experience is so important.
True. So true. And you said it was your first year, so 2012 was the first time you took students to DC. I have a lot of questions about this without, I'm like a logistics nerd sometimes where I'm like, how did you manage all of that? How did you teach? And I'm assuming there was some capital raising as a part of this. Can you just walk us through what that took to?
Yeah, and so right, so we raised the funds to so that it would be free for the students. Um, Fortunately, there was uh, one large donor who pretty much covered most of the trip, and then
That's
the
great.
school had some funds that they were able to kick in. So that made that part a little easier. Um, I had a lot of help from the secretary at the school, Mrs. West, who is also a now lifelong mentor, and she's now a pastor in Montgomery.
Oh,
Um,
great.
and she helped a lot with the logistics. But no, I have learned so much since then, and like now, like I have a system down pat where I know exactly when I need to contact the airline. So uh, airlines have group travel where instead of like going onto the website and like booking individually like each
Yeah.
person, you can enter a contract with the airline essentially and provide all the names, and you lock in a certain fare. So like stuff like that I've learned. And um, you know, for a, for the first half of the program, we always went to the same hotel. So I would contact the manager every year, but then when they jacked their prices up, like to a point that it just wasn't in our budget, we started
Mhm.
staying somewhere else, and somewhere else was great. Um, but yeah, it definitely takes a lot of coordinating, and then putting together the itinerary of. So the main focus of the trip is to expose the kids to different college and career opportunities. So the
Mhm.
schedule is jam packed. In DC, obviously, the GW tour, Howard University, and then meetings with people in government, people in the nonprofit world, people in the private sector who do like government affairs work. And so we're in this itinerary or the schedule that's just like, place to place to place.
Mhm.
But figuring all of that out, it's one thing if you're planning your own day and say, okay, I'll meet with someone at 10 and then have a lunch meeting and then a, coffee meeting. But with a group, it's a lot of work, but it's really, the part that I love is like just seeing the students who, for most of them, it's their first time flying on
Mhm.
an airplane, and just that experience of like walking through TSA security with them and making sure they have their boarding passes. And then when we get on the plane, getting everyone seated, and then, bracing for takeoff, and all of these things that people who have traveled and flown a lot can easily take for granted, or it's just like, second nature to them, like to just
Mhm.
see the excitement in the kids' faces, that's always the best part of it. And so yeah, a lot of work, but very rewarding.
Hmm. I know you said a lot of the students had not been on a plane before. Was it about the same number of those that had not left the state?
Yeah, and part of what started this was I had a U.S. map in my
Hmm.
classroom, and sometimes, like, if we finished a few minutes before the bell rang, students would look at the map and they would say, like, Mr. Ensler, how long does it take to get from Montgomery, to Atlanta, or Montgomery to, I have relatives in Chicago, or
Hmm.
all of and that then sparked more and more conversation of, like, who's traveled, and I would say about, yeah, half had been out of state. And by out of state, maybe had been to, right, neighboring Georgia, maybe had been down to Florida, maybe took a road trip to visit relatives. Like, I do remember one in particular who had been to Michigan, to Detroit to visit family. But yeah, just, for the most part, it was their first time being in a bigger city. Um, and just seeing, yeah, them taking everything. And I remember every year, one of the funniest things, or the kids always ask, um, where are the gas stations in DC? And then when we finally see, because for those who don't know Montgomery, like in Alabama, there are gas stations every exit of the interstate. There are multiple ones.
Hmm.
But then even within cities, there, just because it's such a driving culture here, there are
Yeah.
big gas stations everywhere. Um, so the kids always then ask, and then when they first see it, like, the gas stations are so much, they're
Yeah.
packed in, on a city, corner, and the kids, like, just can't believe, that it's such a small gas station. And it's like stuff like that where the meetings are amazing and the college tours, but, like, that just basic life stuff. And I laugh every time because I know it's gonna happen, and
Hmm.
it's like the same reaction of, like, oh my gosh. And and taking them on the metro,
Hmm.
same thing. They've never been on a subway system before, so to go underground and experience that, it's just all really special. And I'm really glad that we get to do it, and continue to be able to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, that those moments sound really endearing, where it's like, oh, look at you being a kid in a new city. That's just my heart is warmed thinking about that kind of exposure. Like it's all so valuable, all parts of it.
Yeah,
So you do Teach America for 2 years, correct?
for 2 years. And yeah, my second year, I I took the LSAT. So I
Hmm.
still had this interest and long term goal of, I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to do civil rights work on a policy or legal level. So yeah, took the LSAT, and ended up back in New York for law
Hmm.
school. And so at the end of law school, there was a survey, and it asked, like, what was your favorite part of law school? And, like, the first thing that came to mind, I was like, being close to family, and getting
Hmm.
to see my mom and dad. And it was, law school was, it was hard, but also, and for anyone listening who's maybe thinking of law school, like, yes, take it seriously, and you have to work very hard and put in a lot of hours, but also, like, you know, give yourself some time and space to, like, enjoy, other things. Like, some people become all consumed by it. And
Hmm.
I think having done TFA and being a couple years out of undergrad just helped,
Hmm.
and also, being very, having taught where we saw all sorts of challenges and
Hmm.
hardships, from our students, their families. um, it put in perspective, like, yes, like, law school is challenging, but it's intellectually hard. But I was like, and I don't say that to, like, take away from or minimize, like, the real stress and anxiety that people feel in law school or in grad school. But I had, a perspective that helped me get through it. Um, in a what I found to be a pretty good way.
Hmm.
All that to say though, that throughout law school, I was constantly thinking about Alabama, coming back to Alabama, checking in on my former students. I mean, every time there was an article about, a sports team, I kept reading the Montgomery newspaper online, and every time there was, a sports championship or graduation, stuff that I was coming back for, I was checking in with students. And as corny as it sounds, like I was physically in New York, but my heart was still in Montgomery. Um,
Mm.
so my second summer, I spent back here in Montgomery and doing social justice, civil rights, policy work, and saw, on the weekends or evenings, was, did college tours with students, or, help them with their resumes, or, whatever it was. And to me, it just all felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. And Montgomery feels like home.
Mm.
And so my, third year of law school, I um, only looked at jobs in Alabama. Again, raised some tensions with my dad.
Okay.
Not as bad as the first time, but there was this sense, and from other family as well, of like, okay, TFA Alabama was like a 2-year thing, and I did it, and now like I continue, with my life. And so the fact that I wanted to come back, um, to them, and look, to be really honest, amongst Jewish New Yorkers, who most people my age were then, you know, working at law firms or working in
Mm.
the, DA's office and establishing their careers, and, uh, just in these, a familiar and conventional path. So the fact that I wanted to be back here, threw them off, but same thing. I just had this incredible conviction of this is what is right. This is where I want to be. So ended up at an organization called Alabama Appleseed
Okay.
that does especially criminal justice policy work. Took the Alabama bar, and was admitted to the bar that later on that fall, and have been a proud Alabamian and Montgomery in again ever since that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, that is that is interesting about your the continued hesitation is what I'm going to call the reaction from your dad, and it sounds like broader family too. Um, it also sounds like you had established and started attending synagogue in Montgomery, like you had started cultivating some like Jewish specific community. So
Yeah,
you were
so
coming
I
back to something like outside of teaching too.
Yeah, I was right. So the Jewish community at that point, had embraced me like a son. Anytime I came back to visit, I always had a place to stay. And the Jewish community here, and part of it is probably the Southern hospitality, that there was just even more of that warmth and embrace, and it just, yeah, it felt like I had my school, kind of Montgomery public schools, teachers, families, like community, and then the Jewish community in between the two, just really felt at home,
Mm-hmm.
and um, glad to be back.
Mm-hmm. Did did that community component give your dad and others, I'm gonna call them skeptics, feel free to correct me if that's like not the right term to use, were you able to point to that and say, no, I this is I'm going back to a community that I love, that I'm developing roots in? Did that help them a little bit with understanding your desire to go back?
Yeah, it a little bit, and yeah, there was comfort in knowing that like this is West. Was always looking out for me, and knowing that families from the synagogue were looking out for me. So there definitely was some comfort in that. And once my dad helped me move back here. So
He
despite
did.
his,
Okay.
he helped me move back again, and that then
Mm-hmm.
became a theme where, um, in the time I've been back, you know, had a couple of moves, and he's been there for, every one of them. Everyone who's moved before, which is pretty much everyone, knows that it can be stressful and tiring.
Mhm.
And I just like have this image in my head of like my dad like sweating and like, but just like packing boxes and helping. So despite being skeptical, ultimately always showed up for me. And
Mhm.
not to say like, oh, actions speak louder than words, but like in this situation, it certainly did that. Like he still was very much there for me. And
Mhm.
then my mom would come. It has kind of become tradition where my mom will come for the Jewish holidays. So she comes here and she makes this amazing brisket
Mm.
that she then flies with, and
I love
packs it in
that.
ice and flies it. Yeah, it's always like a
I
whole
love.
thing. So no, my family has really come around to me being here. My sister has visited plenty of times. When we get into it, I'll talk about the campaign, how involved my mom,
Mhm.
dad, and sister were. So no, it really, you know, that helped a lot to have them, be hands on here.
Mhm. Yeah. Is there anything more that you want to share about that like transition from law school in New York, your heart's in Alabama, you follow your heart back to Alabama, and you have a policy council position with the Alabama Appleseed Center. Is there anything else you want
Yeah.
to fill us in on for that point in
Well,
your career?
yeah, I would, at that point, so I did within that first year of being back, run for the school board.
Okay.
A long time incumbent was retiring, so it was an open seat, and so I, by virtue of that, then connected a lot and got involved in the Montgomery like political world, which was a whole other then kind of community beyond the Jewish community and the kind of school
Mm-hmm.
community. I lost that race by a little bit, but the not but the really special thing about it was how many of my former students were involved and knocked on
Oh.
doors with me, and a lot of them lived in the district, so they and their families were able to vote for me. And I, after losing, it didn't hurt that much, and it was much easier than I expected, accepting the loss, because I, as someone who had recently moved back, um, the person I ran against, long time, Montgomeryan, lots
Mm-hmm.
of those political relationships. So, I
Yeah.
was able to know like we ran a great race, but it wasn't a rejection of me necessarily. It was more support for someone that people had known for a very long time and had relationships with. So I very much understood that, and that, even though my, I think similar to the White House application in that
Mm-hmm.
period, it my way of dealing with it was not like saying, oh well, if I'm not going to win, like screw politics. Um, Instead, I got more involved in, when now Mayor Reed ran the first time. I helped out on his campaign, and then when he got elected, and he was the first black mayor, or is the first black mayor in Montgomery's history, I
Mm.
was able to join his administration as policy advisor, and that was in February of 2020.
Oh boy.
So started for a few weeks, and then this thing called coronavirus happens, and I was very involved in. I mean, not to bring back a traumatic experience for people, but like those first few weeks where we were like, do we wipe down our groceries? Do we, what,
Right. Yeah.
can we, gather outside? Do we, like, all of those things that we were all just like, it was obviously unfamiliar to
Right.
all of us, but,
Mm-hmm.
as the city putting out guidance or putting out certain, policies around that, I was just like, on all these webinars and Zooms and listening to healthcare experts and government policy people, and just trying to absorb it all. But feel, was involved in just a lot of that effort. But then also, there were still policies, around dealing with local economy and support for businesses, and the public school system was going to start a campaign to try to raise property taxes to increase revenue. So like there were all these things happening, and it was really, really a privilege to be in that role, and with just to think of like where I started and then
Mhm.
to end up in that trusted position, was really, another great experience. But again, kind of the pattern of my life of doing nonprofit civil rights work, then government,
Mhm.
um, all that to say, so at that point, I became president of the Jewish Federation board.
Okay.
And for those who aren't familiar, so the Jewish Federation is like the programmatic kind of nonprofit arm, of the Jewish community, and there are Jewish federations everywhere. All you have to do is Google the city. If you're in a big city, chances are there are one, if not one for your state.
Mhm.
And I was president of the board, which was a volunteer position, and we had monthly board meetings, and not a huge commitment or huge task. But our executive director then left for another job, and we were going to have to find someone new. And at that point, I had been at City Hall for 2 years. Went in every day during the pandemic. We didn't work remotely. The core staff for the mayor, we were there every day. So
Mm.
I was just ready to change things up a little bit, and I just knew that I needed a little bit of a different pace, and needed to take a step back from being in something that was as demanding.
Yeah.
And the more that I've thought about how much the Jewish community in Montgomery has meant to me and how much they've been there for me, um, taking on the role of executive director then was really appealing. And our board was very happy that we didn't have to do a whole search.
Mhm.
So I started that, and that was the fall of 2021. And no, that can't be right. It was now I have all my years mixed up.
Was it fall 2020?
Uh,
No.
No, because I started in the mayor's office February. Oh,
February
maybe that
20.
makes sense. Yeah. So then I was in the mayor's office for like a year and a half, and
Okay,
so the
okay.
fall of 2021, take on the Jewish Federation role, um, but then at that point I was keeping up with what was happening in state politics, city politics,
Mhm.
and there was a district in Montgomery that uh, was majority white and majority Republican. And under redistricting, so under the Voting Rights Act, and how every 10 years with the census, states
Mhm.
have to redraw not only their federal congressional districts, but also their state legislative districts.
Mhm.
And it has to follow uh, you know, court law and statutes of
Mhm.
fair representation and equal opportunity. So the district, because the demographic changes um, over the years, the district then it would. I'm trying to explain it in the simplest way. It was very hard to maintain it legally as a majority white district. So it was redrawn to then be majority black, and therefore there would be an opportunity for a Democrat more likely to win the seat. So I started having conversations with people in the community and certainly in politics, and gave
Mhm.
them felt them out on whether it would make sense for me to run for that position. And I got a lot of encouragement and support, and the motivation behind it was I saw at the city level how often there were state laws that either prevented or made it harder to do certain things, knowing that the state drives education policy and
Mhm.
education funding. There was just a lot of appeal to being in that level to continue to try to serve the community, continue to be a part of a joint effort to make things a little bit better. But then with the Jewish Federation, I had to, of course, get permission of like, hey, I'm the executive director of this nonprofit. I'm only in that role for a couple months, but needed to make sure our board was okay with it. And they were, and ultimately, they trusted that I can handle both the Jewish Federation role and being in the legislature, and ran for that seat, won the primary that spring, and then the general election in November of 2022, and flipped the seat from Republican to Democrat. And similar to the school board race, like a lot of my former students were part of it, former colleagues. But then my mom, dad, and sister, I were here closer to the election, but helped, knock on doors. They helped make phone calls. They, helped, hold up my signs at busy intersections, like, and again, to go from them being, skeptical and not so sure about this to like fully like being literally hands-on in supporting what I was doing here, that just made it that much more special, and really a lot of ways kind of confirmed, or solidified my decision and decisions to be here.
Wow, first of all, you did a really good job breaking down districting and redistricting. So great job. That that is just really just all of that is super interesting. So you had this seat ever flipped from Republican to Democrat before, is my first question.
So the history in Alabama was that like the Democrats and Republicans also like flipped. So
Right,
obviously like
yeah.
party. So there had been a Democrat in the seat before, but it wasn't necessarily like a Democrat that we think of.
It was like a Bull Connor Democrat as opposed to like a is that not
well, as I'm saying this, there was actually, I think he was a Democrat. I should know the history of the seat better, but because of redistricting and the changes every 10 years and the parties, kind of flipping, I'll have to check what the history was. I know, I do know that it was the first time a state legislative seat in Alabama had flipped since 2010. So
okay.
it was 12 years since a Democrat in anywhere in the state had defeated a Republican,
Okay.
for an incumbent Republican, and by winning, I became the only Jewish member of the Alabama legislature, and very proud to bring that identity into the state house, and grateful to be be the only one, but hopefully not the only one.
Yeah. First one, but not the last one.
And there were two before me, one in the 70s, one in the 1800s.
1800s.
So large gaps in between, but I'm the only one currently, and the only one in.
Thank you. I misspoke.
In a long time. All good. No, I get it a lot where people say, "Oh, the first Jewish member," and I just want to make sure I give credit to those who came before me.
Yeah, you're still among the like the single digits of Jewish people being represented in Alabama legislature.
Yes, there you go.
Very cool. Tell us a little bit about District 74. So is it still like I hear you say there's like shifting race demographics? Tell us a little bit about your constituents.
Yeah, so the district is, so racially it's 55% Black, about 42% white, and then the rest, a little bit of Asian, a little bit Hispanic population. And then there are neighborhoods that are much poorer neighborhoods. There are some working class neighborhoods, some middle class neighborhoods, and then some that are, I wouldn't call them affluent, but they're upper middle class, or at least kind of a step up from even middle class.
So a lot of
So it's very,
diversity. Like,
yeah. So economically, racially, and then even just geographically, it spans from all the way in the north part of the city, um, all the way down to the southern part. And there are
hmm
parts of the district that are like very residential. Then there are parts that are very commercial. There are parts that have a lot of abandoned property and stores that are no longer open.
mm.
And then there are parts of it that I'm sure if you remember where the Publix is, and there's a Starbucks, and so it's diverse in a lot of different ways. But I love that, and I love that I'm able to represent so many different neighborhoods and different residents in Montgomery.
I definitely remember that Publix because those of us that were down in Butler County, we had Walmart
Right.
groceries or Piggly Wiggly, and I'm not gonna, there was a third one. But like for fresher produce, I would sometimes on a Sunday make a trip up to that Publix to get some maybe nicer cheese, maybe fresher produce. No shame to the establishments in Greenville, but I love that Publix as a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I figured you would know it for those reasons. So
Yeah. So, and just so our listeners are aware, what is the like I guess racial breakdown of Montgomery, hearing that your district is 55% people of color and then might like bigger chunk white and then like other, I'm just gonna say
yeah, so
other, put them on.
Montgomery
hmm
is Montgomery maybe like 65% Black residents.
Okay.
And then I would put maybe 30% white, and then
Okay.
the rest, there's a growing Hispanic population, and then a little bit of a especially South Korean population. There's a Hyundai
Oh yeah.
car plant here, so
hmm
there's some South Korean residents. So the district is not it it's not a direct representation of the city
Yeah.
demographics. But again, that's just kind of the way the redistricting
Yeah.
purpose works out.
I wanted to ask the question because some listeners might be familiar with like just in certain parts of the country, not just as I'm hitting my mic again, talking with my hands, not just below south of the Mason-Dixon line. There's like some districts that I imagine would have like much more saturation of one race or like ethnic group, and so I just wanted to like just to check in terms of what you said about your district versus Montgomery, how different it was, how like what the Venn diagram overlap was. Um, so yeah, it sounds like there's just a lot of different experiences of constituents, businesses, properties. Like you have a lot a lot packed into that district.
Yeah, and then a lot of public schools, which my favorite part of the role is getting
Yeah.
to visit schools. And we have there was one high school that serves a lot of students in the district. Was called Jefferson Davis High School. It's now named it's JAG. It's Johnson Abernathy Gretz, and Frank Johnson, who was a federal judge who ruled in the Montgomery bus boycott to
hmm
overturn segregated buses, and then had other ruled in favor of civil rights. In other cases, Ralph Abernathy, who was Dr. King's kind of right hand man and
hmm
another pastor here in Montgomery, and then
Yeah.
Gretz, after Robert Gretz, who was a white pastor who was very involved in the movement.
hmm
So JAG High School, and then tons of elementary schools, middle school. So yeah, a lot going on.
That's great. It sounds like you really enjoy that part of being a public servant, interacting with all ages, but especially with the school age people. It sounds like you really have a heart for education still.
Yeah, and I think those of us who have taught, it's like having been in the classroom. It's just I don't think we can ever fully like you know not be teachers, even if we're
Yeah,
doing other things. So
right.
I love that part of it, and yeah, it's
hmm
always really rewarding and uh, fun to visit with students.
Hmm. I love that. Phil, let's take a quick break and then come back.
Sounds good.
All right, listeners, we are back from our break and we are talking with Representative Phillip Ensler about his time serving in the Alabama legislature. So, Phil, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk us through what your day-to-day work is like as a legislator in the legislature. Make
It's
sure
like
I get my vowels right there.
I always make sure that I enunciate very clearly on that. And I feel like same thing, I like very much pronounce the legislator part
Yeah.
of it. And yeah, so I
Yeah. Okay.
thanks
You understand
for
me.
getting that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, they often sound the same when you
They do.
say
They
them.
do.
But yeah, so I won in that was November of 2022.
Hmm.
Really, and the way it works in Alabama for state legislative seats, for some reason you get sworn in immediately. So there's
Mm.
not like this period of, I know with people are familiar with, federally what happens that now, if the term all starts in January. Um, but we get sworn in. So the day after the election, um, I had my rabbi here in Montgomery bring a Torah, and the Torah is the the Bible, all in Hebrew, um, you all handwritten, and we did it in front of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church,
Mm.
going back
So
to
cool.
my first time visiting Montgomery and going there, and then had my mom, dad, and sister there, and other supporters, and to just have that moment of getting sworn in with the Torah, which is so meaningful because of my Jewish
Hmm.
identity, to have Dexter Avenue Church because of my love and all the inspiration from the civil rights movement, and then of course having family there.
Hmm.
Couldn't have asked for better, and was sworn in, and knew that as a new member that I wasn't gonna go in and like quickly or like be able to move mountains and pass all this legislation and get all these things done. I knew there would be a learning curve. I knew that I'd have to get to know my colleagues and learn the ins and outs of the process. I mean, everything. I know we all think about the neighborhood schoolhouse rock video, like how does a bill become a law.
Yeah.
But even within the Alabama legislature, there's all these specific processes around filing a bill, and how it gets assigned to a committee, and like how you get a
Hmm.
hearing on it, and like just all of this stuff that I needed to learn. And the first year was a lot of that, but also a chance to start developing some policy ideas. I mean, of course, from having taught, cared a lot about in general anything with public education,
Hmm.
but really came in very focused and continue to be very focused on gun violence.
Hmm.
And a big reason for that is those of us who have taught, um, unfortunately, many have had students who have passed away from gun violence,
Hmm.
or have students who are the ones who ended up doing the shooting, and just having had a lot of students on both ends of the of that,
Yeah.
and just
Same
knowing how
here.
much
Yeah. Sorry to
I
interrupt you.
figure
For
no,
what
no,
for what it's
no,
worth,
and
yeah, I have
you know,
students that have both been victims and been on the perpetrating side. And I know that's not just an Alabama thing, but it's really my lens is that it's like especially acute there, and maybe that's just because I know people. But thank you for your work on gun
yeah,
violence reform.
no, and it's look, the just seeing the trauma of how it affects not only families but everyone who knew
Right.
that person.
Mm-hmm.
And the in particular, there was a neighborhood meeting, a neighborhood in my district,
Mm-hmm.
where a woman came up to me after, said her son had died from gun violence a few years back, and she was like, is there anything that she was like, I know we can't bring him back, but is there anything we can do to try to prevent another family from going through this kind of heart
Mm,
wrenching, unconscionable, pain? So I've been very focused on that issue. Um, Politically, it's challenging in Alabama, and that there is if you start talking about guns, there's this a lot of resistance to that. But what I've done is really, focus on talking about it in terms of human lives, and it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It really is a human issue, and
mhm,
I try to center that as much as I can. It's also something that law enforcement in Alabama really want to see more done to address it.
mm,
So, for those who uh, I very much, welcome and am grateful for law enforcement support
mhm,
on it, and then having though families that victims that have been affected. So just having all of those voices be a part of it. That it's not
mhm,
just yes, I'm pushing the bill, and yes, I'm working on it, but it is this effort of pastors in Montgomery that have been a part of it. And one thing on the issue that I was able to get in the state budget now the last 2 years is funding for a conflict resolution program in Montgomery Public Schools at Lee High School, which the name is now
oh,
Percy Julian.
okay,
Um, and but it helps the school hire coaches, like not sports coaches, but counselors and
yeah,
who can work with students on teaching de-escalation and how to channel anger and how to deal with the wave of emotions and frustrations that come in life. And for me, that was such a full circle moment, and a small chunk of money in the scheme of the whole budget. And not gonna, and I say this about everything, it's not going to stop all gun violence, it's not going to save every life, but it's a lot of different things we can do that collectively will make a
mhm,
difference. But to go back to Lee, to announce that students have been and will always be at the center of I work. And I guess in a lot of, not in a lot of ways, but Teach for America, certainly, wants that, or that people
yeah,
that have done it. And so yeah, it's been, all that to say, it has been an experience, and there are, we've had some really big fights on certain issues and disagreements between Democrats and Republicans. But I will say that a lot of my Republican colleagues have been very gracious. They've been welcoming. They're willing to find common ground where we can, and that it's. I know that's not the case in a lot of legislatures, and certainly for younger or newer Democrats. And but navigating that though is um, being able to compartmentalize and say, okay, well, on this issue we vehemently disagree and we have very different views, but we agree on this issue, so we can figure out how to work together. And you opt to say the obvious. It's like you need support to get any sort of bill or funding through. So yeah, it's been quite the experience so far.
mhm, yeah. I'm appreciating the fact that you have the support of, it sounds like a group of Montgomery pastors, and that's just of course like bringing up civil rights movement mobilizing that Dr. King did. Do you think that your role with the Jewish Federation of Central Alabama helps you engage in dialogue with other faith leaders, and for our list to like not to interrupt myself, but for listeners, like faith in the South is a lot, in my experience, a lot more visible than what I see in
Yeah.
other parts of the country that I've lived in. So I'm asking Phil this question because it's a really important thing that it's not just about like having the support of the pastors, but like congregations really listen. So I'll let you answer, Phil. Sorry, I like talked over myself to explain.
No, you're good. So yeah, with my role with the Jewish Federation, there's a lot of interfaith work that we do where it's pastors of different Christian denominations.
Hmm.
They're representatives from the local Muslim community, the Baha'i community. Um,
Hmm.
so just different, different groups that come together,
Hmm.
and that has certainly, because helped develop those relationships and trust, and knowing that we can turn to each other when we need different things. Now, my role with the federation and role with the legislature are very separate, and I
Oh
keep
yeah.
them separate. But there's certainly then the relationships that are there, and the dialogues that we've had in my federation role can translate, yes, into then people who are supporting some of the work that I've been doing, and some of the pastors. I mean, they've been for years and years, trying to address this particular issue. So just getting
Yeah.
their input and having them part of the process is really helpful. Um, and look, there at to your point about religion being such a prominent aspect of life in the South.
Hmm.
There's often an argument made that uh, the best way to deal with gun violence is through having people have better values, and be a better
Oh yeah.
person, and if they are going to church more. Look, I think there's of course a role for that. I you, certainly, with there are a lot of pastors that are involved and do that. um, I always say I was elected though to be a lawmaker.
Hmm.
So that's why focusing then on, yes, we can have a role for religion and for the faith-based community and for
Hmm.
churches. Certainly can have that, but then also as lawmakers do our duty, and try to look for some solutions, knowing that we can't do it alone, and the church can't do it alone. But again, as cheesy or corny as it sounds, if we both tackle it, we can
Yeah.
really save some lives.
Yeah, that's such important work. And it must be, having lived on the West Coast this long, I didn't even think about the moral, I'm gonna use air quotes, like the moral argument of like people just need to return to values. And in areas like where you live, it's like, well, people are, there's high participation in religious activity. Maybe it's more complex than checking our values.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I find myself saying this about most things in life now, that things are complex
Yeah.
and there's nuance, and
Yeah.
so.
Hmm. So I guess I'm gonna just take a bit of a turn here, Phil. So you're elected, you're a lawmaker, and in the first year that you are elected, your dad, who's been such a champion and supporter of you, experiences some pretty serious health issues, correct?
Yeah, so that spring, of my first year in office, and so
Hmm.
again, just getting my feet wet,
Yeah.
um, and what happened, his cardiologist had found some aneurysms,
Hmm.
um, that he felt very strongly needed to be removed surgically.
Hmm.
And my dad then, he typical him, not was very nonchalant. Oh, it's minor and I'll be fine. He didn't want us to worry. But his aunt and uncle, my great aunt and uncle, called me a couple of weeks before the surgery, and they were like, Phil, we really think you should come up and be here,
Hmm.
with your dad for it. And they wouldn't have done that if they didn't have, kind of valid reason to think that. So my dad was like, very, you don't need to come, it's really okay, blah blah blah. But I went up,
Hmm.
and the surgery then got postponed because there was, uh, not that it matters, but the equipment in the procedure room was not working, and so
Oh
glad they
yeah.
postponed it.
Yeah.
Um, so I, come back to Montgomery. The surgery is rescheduled for 2 weeks later. My dad is like, absolutely do not come back. You already came once. You have the legislature going on, and you know, do focus on what you need to do there. And my great aunt and uncle once again said, Phil, like, we really think you should come back.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to get my dad like more worked up before the surgery, so I didn't tell him until that Friday. The surgery was going to be on Monday. That Friday, we would talk every day on the phone. So ever since
Mm.
college, when I was going to the White House, I would call him every day on the way there. Um, Not to sidetrack, but one of the hardest things, but also one of the best memories now is if in my legislative role, I've gone back to the White House for certain events, also my Jewish Federation role. And anytime I go back, not being able to call him,
Mm.
walking to the White House, but the part that helps me and also is brings me a lot of joy is I instead call either my best friend, or not either. I call my best friend Mark, and also my sister.
Mhm.
And my friend Mark always knows, like, he's like, you walk into the White House now, and I'm like, yep. And that's all I
Oh,
need is just to someone close in my life like call to fill the void.
yeah.
But it also brings back this gratitude and these memories that we had such
Yeah.
a good time. But throughout TFA, I would call him every day, on the way to school. Throughout law school, we would talk every day. Since I moved back, we would talk every day. And always said, I love you at the end. There was
Mm.
always, we weren't like this, oh, that's, too, we have to be too manly and we can't tell each other we love each other. So always said that. So that Friday, he was like, oh, what are you doing
Good.
this weekend? I was like, well, actually, I'm coming up tomorrow, Dad, and just you'll I'll be there. And so we ended up, um, that Saturday night. I then went to his apartment and we ordered in from an Italian place that growing up, I like my most of my life had been our go-to Italian place.
Mhm.
And um, we have like the same order that we get chicken parmesan, and so we
Mm.
ordered that. And then he took out, my grandma had passed a few years back, and my dad had some like plates and like china like from her. So he was like, let's eat on your grandma's china. And I was like, okay, like it's
Oh,
takeout,
that's
like
so
do we
fun.
really need to? But we
Yeah.
ate on that. And then he had, so I had rescued a cat during Teach for America named Franklin, and Franklin then, and long story short, ended up, living with my dad, and my dad loved Franklin. So we had a really good dinner, a meal that nothing fancy, but that meant a lot to us. And then Franklin like uh, would run out the door and into the hallway. It was an apartment building, and we were just watching Franklin roam around and just amused by all of it. And I share all of that because he then went in for the surgery on Monday and then never came left the hospital after
Mhm.
that. And to have a last meal and have it be joyful and have it, have the cat and my grandma's, china, and it's the fact that that's like the last experience that we shared,
Mhm.
beyond then, the hospital. Um, for me, it's a few things of like, there's a huge gratitude and like relief. Like if I had stayed in Montgomery and I was
Mhm.
too busy with the legislature, and like, not to sound cliche, but it's worth emphasizing, like there is nothing more important than family and friends. And like,
Mhm.
and it's easier said than done at times, but like if you can be with family or friends, especially when they need you, like,
Mhm.
I will always be so grateful that I was there and had that experience versus, not. going. And he went into the hospital and had surgery, and um, came out of surgery, and there were some complications from it. His blood wasn't flowing properly to his leg. They were going to have to do, there was a blood clot. They were going to have to do a second surgery. And I was going from New York to Washington, D.C., actually to, this is where it all just, I don't know how to explain it, but, all just how life happens. But I was going to the White House for, it was, May is Jewish American Heritage Month. So I was invited to go for that, but knowing my dad was going back into surgery, um, I was leaning towards staying and, for him to come out of the surgery. And I spoke to the surgeon, and, they said, look, whether you're here or not, we still have to do the same thing. And my dad then he saw me talking to the surgeon, and my dad said, he said, you're getting on that plane. Like, he literally got angry in the hospital, but he's like, you're getting on that plane, you're going to DC. And he was like, shake my hand on it, shake my hand. And at that point I was like, I want him to be calm and not, and he wanted me to go because he didn't want me to worry about him. So I was like, all right, I'll go. And then the last thing he asked if I had a business card on me, and it's like, why the fuck does he want a business card? I hope I'm allowed to curse on here.
Oh,
but,
yeah. Yep.
Why, I was like, why does he want it? And he wanted to just be able to brag to the doctors and say, look, my son is a legislator, in Alabama. And
I love that.
that was the last interaction that we had of him truly being conscious. And you know again, I can't be more grateful that each step of the way, that we had these moments, and I gave him a hug and said I love you, and got on the plane to DC. And then from there, the surgery for the blood clot led to infection that got in his bloodstream, called sepsis. And then he was having breathing issues, and it was just one thing after another. I was back in Montgomery for a week, and for a little bit, the doctors were hopeful that he would rebound, but it just wasn't getting better. So I went back to New York, and they really didn't know what would happen. And my sister was there, and we visited him together, and just seeing him hooked up to the ventilator, and just at that point, because he had been in the hospital a few weeks, he hadn't shaved, and my dad always shaved, so like seeing like the facial hair, it was just all really tough. My sister, then, we didn't know what was going to happen, and the hospital said, look, it can be days and weeks of him still in this state, or the worst case can happen. So my sister went back. She lives in LA, so she went back, and very early then that next morning, the hospital called to say that they didn't think he was going to make it past that day. So I went back to the hospital, and I put on, there's something called a tallis. It's like almost like a scarf or kind of shawl. It's a prayer shawl. And I had his tallis, that was his. And there's some prayers that you say, or that you can say, when someone is close to passing away. And it's basically just kind of asking for just a peaceful ending. And it, in a lot of ways, it's also helpful for the person who's doing the praying, just to have something to kind of channel the emotion into.
Yeah.
So I, said some of the prayers, and you know, at that point he was not conscious,
Hmm.
and aware that I was there. And I, said the prayers, and had some time with him, and then at that point just needed a little fresh air myself, and needed to wanted to eat lunch, and just like take a little bit of time. And all that to say, when I was out, the hospital called. I mean, this was like 30 minutes after I left, and they said he was going to pass at any moment. And at that, like, I was completely like, I felt like I said what I needed to say. I felt like I did what I needed to do to, like, I didn't have to rush back to be there for the moment he
Okay. Yeah.
passed. And the there's a lot I can get into, but a prevailing just sentiment that I've had is like, I told, telling him I love him every day, telling him I was
Hmm.
grateful for him. There was no regret of like, I wish I
Hmm.
did this, or I should have told him more, or I,
Yeah.
um, and I thought, back to TFA, and then moving back here, and like, we had some very, tense moments, but we got through them, and
Hmm.
had this incredible bond. And that's, just been the hardest part, is he was such a big presence, you know, in my life, in so many ways. And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. It has been the hardest year and a half um, of my life. And, it's been challenging emotionally, from a mental health standpoint.
Hmm.
And so right after, so Jewish faith, it's big on, or a custom is, you bury someone as quickly as you can. And
Okay.
the reason for that is just, um, to essentially start the transition of, and Judaism allows for kind of different beliefs on what happens once someone passes away, but
Hmm.
at least just transition into that next part. So then it was like, and there's also something called to do the funeral, within like as quickly as you can. So we literally were doing it for 2 days later, sort of
Hmm.
quickly get notify family and friends, and coordinate with the cemetery. It was just like a lot of like logistical stuff, and it's this
Yeah.
very kind of peculiar, like, you're you know all these emotions, and um sadness, and like disbelief, and but then also having to just like get stuff done.
Yeah.
And um that's how my dad was, though. Like, he would just you know get it done. So my
Hmm.
sister and I, with our mom support, got everything organized. And um there's something called Shiva, which is then initial mourning period, where family and friends come. You do it often at the person's house who passed away, and it's a
Hmm.
chance for then people who either came to the funeral, or couldn't make it, to come and comfort the mourners.
Hmm.
And there are certain prayers we say, but like, it's big on like food, like eat. It's also a time to like eat, and like, it's also encouraged, to like have a drink, and like
Hmm.
be at ease, and to celebrate, and do with a l'chaim, a cheers to life. There are just all sorts of things that you could do. And my two best friends from growing up, who I went to the same synagogue with, were there for me, amongst, I mean, friends from law school. There were some TFA friends who came, college friends. So it's like this, really, really sad, and the worst thing I've experienced, but also really great to see all these people I love, and to,
Yeah.
you know, just be with them. and that helped so much those first few days. But then the first month is called the period of the shloshim, which means yeah, actually don't know what the exact meaning is, but it's the initial then period of grieving. And there are a lot of customs that go with it, and depending if you're Orthodox, conservative, reform, like people follow very different things. But one custom is for men is to not shave or cut your hair during that period. And it's my understanding of that is like you're in a distraught kind of state, and you to really focus on the person who passed away. Like you're not supposed to focus on kind of taking, take care of yourself and eating, drinking water, sleeping, but like your physical appearance like shouldn't be concerned about that, because you should be focused on um the grieving. So I didn't shave and like grew a beard for the first time.
Mm.
I just laugh at it because like my family like and people thought it looked so horrible. And I was like, it's not about how it looks. I was like, I'm not doing it for
This isn't for
aesthetic purposes.
fashion. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
And I just that so I stayed in his apartment for
Mm.
those 30 days, and I felt like being in his space and with the cat Franklin for me would be comforting. And his it still smelled like him. I mean,
Yeah.
everything was the way he left it when he went to the hospital. And I admittedly like most days was in bed and slept and didn't really do a whole lot. There were bills I had to pay of his and start the probate process. So there were certain kind of matters that I had to handle. Um, and all that to say that having that time where I can literally just tell people like it's a period of the shloshim, like I'm taking this time to mourn my dad, and you know
Mhm.
not do work, not have to commit to anything, and just to feel like I really have this time to feel how I'm going to feel
Mhm.
was so important and helpful. And look, I mean, ever since, well, one other thing I'll say about the first and full year, you're supposed to say it's called the mourner's Kaddish, and it's
Mm.
actually in Aramaic, not Hebrew, but or so it's just a prayer for the deceased, and
Mm.
you're supposed to say it every day for the first year of someone's passing. So I would say that every day. So no matter like then in the months after that first month, like no matter how busy I was, I would, I always had that prayer to turn to. And then it's customary uh, to do an unveiling of the headstone at the sometime around the 1 year mark. um, and we did that, and just having some of those rituals to turn to helped a lot. I will say talking to a grief counselor,
Mhm.
having that therapy and that outlet um helped to has helped a lot. And but look, I struggle with it every day
Mhm.
still. I miss
Yeah.
him every day. There are a million things that remind me of him or that I would want to tell him, and it still feels surreal. Even talking about it
Yeah.
feels surreal.
Yeah.
But I'll wrap it up, by saying this, that just again having so many great experiences and moments together. Not a perfect relationship, but ultimately one where you know, we he was there for me, and I
Mhm.
poetically it's like the fact that at the very end I was there for him after
Mhm.
him being there for me. My whole life just felt like a very fitting way um at the end of his physical life.
Mhm.
Thanks for
Thank
letting me share all of
Yeah,
that. And
no, I just sometimes I like want to run into the next thing I'm going to say. I just wanted to just make sure that I took a second before thanking you for sharing all of that. Um, I know that just like your dad was so proud of you in life, that he's still just so proud of you. I also want to acknowledge that you're like it is really not that long ago that he passed away, and I just want to really validate and normalize that grief is probably still very acute for you. I don't want to like try to like walk around in your head, but I when I talk to other friends who lose parents, there's almost like these like years plural where there's this like fogginess. And so I just it means a lot to me that you trust in me, trust our listeners to, while the grief is still so fresh, talk about it. And also, I just want to give you a lot of applause and kudos for, as a man in our society, showing like my dad and I loved each other and we told each other that. And I felt my feelings. And I just think that's like when we talk about grief, that is just so important that we see that modeled. Um, and and like that's the best thing for grievers and mourners to do, is to sit with those feelings like you did. And I think it's also just helpful to think about like Jewish tradition around it. It sounds like my perception of some Jewish tradition, like the getting the remains in the ground. I'm like, oh, that's probably tied back to hygiene, like very practical. But then there's also that like
Right.
emotional component of give yourself some time. Don't make commitments. Don't worry about cutting your hair, shaving your face. Like just exist and be. And so, thank you for teaching us and for honoring your dad by sharing the memories of those last few days and what your mourning process has been like since then.
Yeah, thank you for listening and letting me share. And it helps to talk about it. And I think that's also something I know when people are grieving, like we, other than saying like I'm so sorry and I,
Hmm.
my condolences, like we often don't know what to say. And or tend to ask people for the first like few weeks like how they're doing and all that, and then understandably that starts to taper off. And um it's just not at the forefront of most people's minds to ask. But I think talking, everyone's different, but
Hmm.
um I have found that like being asked about it and like having that space to share it
Hmm.
is really helpful, for me at least. So thank you, for giving me that
Oh
space. And
yeah.
to those who are listening. And uh, don't quote me on any of the rituals. There's rabbis who will probably like correct some of it and say like
If
certain
I
things were a
get
little off. But
DMs from rabbis on this, I'll be so happy about my reach, Phil. I'll be so
yeah,
happy. But sorry, I don't mean to be making a joke, but
no, no, and well, also, no, that would be great.
that would be
Maybe Adam
amazing.
Brody, will reach out. But the all jokes aside, the thing that I really appreciated about the Jewish rituals were that, and my best friend Mark, he lost his dad a few years back as well,
Mm,
to prostate cancer. And so to have a best friend who had also lost his dad and they were very close, uh, you know, you know, my Mark would say, well, his joke has been welcome to the club. And he was
yeah.
like, I mean that in all of the, hardest ways. And I wish you weren't a part of the club. Um, but I bring that up to say that, something he always emphasized to me that helped is like, there's no, you observe and do the rituals and things that are best for you. So, there's some people who saying the mourner's Kaddish, may not be helpful.
Hmm.
Maybe going right back to work instead of taking that period of the shloshim. Like for everyone, it's different. And I think allowing that, um, people I'm grateful that I had different things I could turn to, but also recognize like, you know, people handle it in different ways.
Hmm. I I'm glad you mentioned that part about Mark's experience with loss too. I'm e equally sorry that he has also had to befriend grief in this specific way. But as I've been talking with people through this podcast, there's really a distinction for me of folks who don't have anybody else that they like, either it's like the same kind of death, or like just didn't know anybody who had lost their parent when at the time that they lost their parent, and they feel so alone. And then there's, I would say, like another category, and it's people like you and Mark, who are, at least one other person who has lived through this. And there's this like camaraderie, where it's like you don't want this to be the thing that you're bonding over, but there's this, it seems like it's just a lot less lonely. And so what I hope people can feel empowered to do as they themselves grieve is to be open about it, like you are being, because we never know how that's going to help somebody else who might be in that other category of, I don't know how to talk about this. People aren't asking me about it. I'm afraid to talk about it because it's going to make me emotional. So, um, I love that, the example of you and your friendship, because I wish more people had that, even though it's like, in, of course, like the saddest of
Yeah.
circumstances.
No, it's exact right, and that's exactly how we feel about it. That it's
Hmm.
we wish that neither of us were in that club, as he says.
Yeah,
But you know, just the reality that we are, like, to have each other is that much um, more helpful. And it's made me, when I then see other people, especially like if they post on social media or they share
hmm,
that it's the anniversary of a parent or a loved one passing away. It's also helped me feel like I can relate better and have a little more empathy,
yeah,
because I know how it feels, and to just say to
absolutely.
people like, you know, I'm sure this is really tough, and um,
Hmm.
so yeah, it's
Yeah,
like I said, and I know it's part of life, and to tie it all together, though, I like I said, I think about him constantly,
hmm,
but he left his mark, and
hmm,
his presence in so much, and at the
yeah.
legislature now, to know that, I mean, he literally cried on election night, because he was
Mm,
so proud and happy,
love that.
and to know the hardest part is not being able to like tell him every day what's going on and
Yeah,
call him on the way there, but he is very much part of, even though he's physically gone, he's still very much a part and lives on through all these memories, and that's
yeah,
the way I've tried to best approach it is, or not best approach it, just how I've approached it
yeah,
is, allow for the sadness, allow for the emotions, um, and then also, um, just realize that there are all these, things where he's still there,
yeah,
uh, in memory.
yeah, yeah. And you have his memory, and it's very apparent to me, and I'm sure listeners will hear it too, that his legacy it is living on through you, and it informs how you live your life and how you lead. And again, I just know he's so was and is enormously proud of you.
Well, thank you, and
Hmm.
again, I appreciate having the space to share.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we are running up against time, so I don't want to like rush away from this discussion, but is there anything else you want to say before I transition us to the end of show questions?
No, go for it,
Oh,
and
right.
welcome those questions.
Perfect. Okay. So, question number one: if you could go back to right before you were elected, what would you say to that younger version of yourself?
So this is like a very specific or kind of technical answer, but um, there, when I started campaigning and over the period of the campaign, like there's so much you have to do of like ordering T-shirts and yard signs, and so I wish I kept like a better. This again is a very like practical. Like I wish I would told myself like, hey, keep a folder on your computer of campaign stuff, and like have a running list of vendors and contacts, and like, because now it's I have it all scattered of
Yeah.
emails and texts. And so yeah, I would tell myself, uh, to be a little more organized in that sense. And also I knew this, but I think reminding myself that politics, there are ups and downs as there are
Mhm.
in any job. But to continue to just, and I think this is true, of so much in life, of put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
Just continue to try to do what you can. I would just remind myself of that.
That's great. I love that. Second question. What has been the most helpful tool or resource in navigating some of the challenge you described for us today?
Yeah, so like you said earlier, absolutely, therapy and just having a built-in support. And I won't talk too much about it, but I do want to say that it is a strength to have a counselor. It doesn't mean, or a therapist, it doesn't mean anything is wrong with you.
Yes.
And I always say this to especially young people, the way you go to the gym to take care of your body, and you read to take care of your mind. Therapy is just a way to take care of you. And just having that built-in outlet has been incredibly helpful. Of course,
Hmm.
family and friends, and getting to just talk to people. Certainly Judaism, and having the Jewish community, and having that space, as well. And then a fourth that I'll add in is the history, the civil rights history in Montgomery and in Alabama. And
Yeah.
you know looking at reading back quotes, from civil rights leaders, and
Mhm.
just that, how they dealt with doubt. We often focus on what people accomplish and get done, but
Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by like how people dealt with the hard times. And what I appreciate about
Yeah.
Dr. King even like wrote and talked a lot about this. Like there were a lot of obviously hard periods, and you know big challenges. So all that's like just finding some inspiration in their perseverance. So yeah, the combination of things helps.
I I appreciate and respect all of those things, and I love how you talked about receiving support therapeutically, from a counselor, from a therapist, and how it's. I feel like sometimes we want to assign like moral value to like, oh, you need to talk to somebody, but it's like it's a tool. It's a tool just like any other tool that is intended to help us overcome something and or work through something or just be okay. And there's nothing wrong with it. We don't need to judge it.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about it is that even if you're not going through a tragedy, or something really hard, but just the day to day ebbs and flows of life and work and family and dating and
Yeah.
relationships, like just to have someone to be a sounding board. Um, I think even the healthiest people who are in relatively good circumstances, still can find it helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I feel like I could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. If you could say anything to someone out there who relates to your story, what would you say to them?
I would say be willing to take the risks, and do
Mhm.
what's uncomfortable. I could have, you know, the easier thing would have been to always stay in my bubbles in DC or New York.
Yeah.
Um, but this has been, my life has changed for the better. Because I was willing to do something, of, you know, outside of the norm or what was expected. And I think just, with that, knowing that family may question and not, totally understand what you're doing, but if you really feel like it is the best thing for you, um, pursue it, and try your best to still maintain those relationships with family, but be willing to step out. There's I guess, to tie it all together with the Jewish faith, that there's the story of Abraham starts with that. He, left what was his, his home, and he sets out, on this journey. It's called Lech Lecha. I think that it translates to something of like, go forth or go forward. And I would not, I would encourage people, whatever your faith, to be willing to go forward and
Yeah.
try something different.
Yeah. I really like that. Embrace the unchartedness and unknown. And if you're feeling, and not to put words in your mouth, but like if you're feeling drawn or compelled to do something and it feels really right to you, like listen to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Mhm.
that intuition, that gut feeling, that spiritual feeling, whatever it may be, um, just, give it a shot.
Well, that is all very insightful and inspirational. And I just thank you so much for your time and candor, Phil.
Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure, and really looking forward to hearing what other people have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you to you and also to our listeners for supporting this episode in the podcast. To learn more about the work that Representative Ensler is doing in Montgomery, you can visit his website, which is phillipensler.com. And you can also follow him on Instagram at Phil_Ensler_. If you don't already follow the podcast on Instagram and Spotify, please do. On Spotify, we are Uniquely Qualified, and our Instagram handle is Uniquely Qualified Pod. If you like what you hear here, please show your appreciation with a 5-star review and share this episode with someone you love. If you're inspired by Phil and you want to share your own story, please send me a direct message on Instagram or email uniquelyqualifiedpod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and please remember, we are all uniquely qualified.